Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. My guest today is Sofia Smallstorm. Sofia returns to the show to offer her insights into the dark and sinister world of what she refers to as the Club, and how this malevolent and occult society is behind the desecration of humanity. Tonight's discussion will be based on two of Sofia's recent newsletters: the October newsletter, where she shares her views on the Club and its pervasive influence, and the November newsletter, where she shares her thoughts on the John Podesta email leaks and the Comet Ping Pong scandal, which some researchers believe have exposed an elite pedophile ring operating in the Washington, D.C. area. Sofia is a researcher and documentary filmmaker. She is best known for her documentaries on Unraveling Sandy Hook and 9/11 Mysteries. She is also recognized for her research regarding geoengineering and synthetic biology. Sofia's newsletters are subscriber-based. Her website is sofiasmallstorm.com. Sofia, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Tim. Thank you very much for inviting me back.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for coming back on the show. So, your a couple of newsletters I found particularly interesting. Also, I listened to a few of your interviews, and you offered this idea of the Club, sort of a, I guess you could say, what you call not a secret society, but a sacred society that has pervasive influence. What is the Club? What's your take on this?
All right. So the term the Club is a generic term that I have coined, you could say, for a very vast and deep network of people that wind up and down all our societal levels. People who are in the Club could be your next door neighbor. They could be the President of the United States. They could be more powerful even than presidents and people in politics. They could be CEOs of absolutely giant, international corporations. They could be in the religious organizations of our world. But I now believe, after watching some videos by a guy in Wisconsin called Dave Begotka, Begotka, on YouTube, he was a very, ordinary young man who opened a bar in his town. He comes from Manitowoc County in Wisconsin, and he opened a bar, and this is a fairly, interesting ambition for somebody who was barely 20, but he was doing it. And he would be visited on a regular basis by these guys, these businessmen and people, teachers from the high school, and they would keep inviting him to join the Good Old Boys Club. And this was actually the Eagles Club in town. You know how we have Masonic lodges and Elks lodges, and we've got Kiwanis, Rotary Club, Knights of Malta, these kinds of things that I always thought were hangouts for retired people, places where you played bingo and you smoked a few pipes and cigars and you just, reminisced about old times. But apparently they're not. These are doorways into business networking on the most, superficial level. But then they become much deeper and darker the deeper you are inducted into these organizations, which is apparently based on selectivity. Not everybody is invited into the bowels of the Elks Lodge. But in order to become a member at all, in any of these organizations, they're fraternal orders. You have to take some kind of oath. There's always a Bible, an altar, some, pledge to remain absolutely mum about what goes on behind closed doors. There's a priest present, and one has to be of a certain sound mind and moral character in order to be invited to join. And I was surprised when I was researching these clubs that the people who, for instance, in Dave Begotka's town, it was the Eagles Club. And the Fraternal Order of Eagles was founded in 1898 in Seattle. And members of the Fraternal Order of Eagles throughout history have been people like Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John Kennedy, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, J. Edgar Hoover, Walter Mondale, Earl Warren, Father Edward Flanagan, who founded Boys Town, Billy Ray Cyrus, Jimmy Durante, Bob Hope, Arnold Palmer, and even Art Rooney of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, I was thinking to myself, well, that's a lot of influence. And one thing that these orders, these fraternal orders, brag about is their generosity to children's programs. I think it was the Elks Club that gave 80 million, perhaps it was in 1 year, to charitable children's organizations, involving athletics, handicapped, making braces, hospitals. Everywhere children are, these people are gravitating and giving. And anyway, so this club thing, we talk about in our parlance in this alternative research, we talk about conspiracies and secret societies, but I stumbled in my research across the term sacred society, and I think that's the real nature of these clubs. They conduct sacred rites, rituals, and activities, and on the deep levels, in the deep basements where they consort with Satan and all this stuff that not every member even knows about, but has heard rumors about, there is real darkness going on, which incorporates and includes what I think people call magic with a K, and is satanic and very different from what the average citizen in, Averageville, USA could even imagine or dream of.
So you have these clubs, which you described that they as having, being designed along Freemasonic lines or rituals, rings within rings, multiple levels, depths you can go into, or however you want to phrase it. But they're also posing as charitable, benevolent organizations. And they also include membership among, whether it's local elite, prominent businessmen, politicians. These are the type of organizations that you'd want to join if you want to get ahead, like you said, networking. So that's the background of these organizations. Now, in your newsletter, you do get into the story of this Mr. Bagotka, is his name?
Yeah. Dave Bagotka.
Bagotka. And he's offered membership into one of these clubs after he witnesses an assault on a woman on the lake there. Is it Lake Michigan?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, this is a very famous rape case involving a man called Stephen Avery, which was circling the internet. Stephen Avery was charged with the rape of one of the local women from Dave's town. And Stephen Avery was apparently not guilty of this, yet he was incarcerated and served quite a number of years before advances in DNA proved him innocent. And so what Dave witnessed on the shoreline of the lake, that I guess is right there in Manitowoc County, one of the Great Lakes, Michigan, he witnessed a woman running with, half naked down the beach with blood all over her and screaming. And the police were already summoned because her husband had said she had gone jogging and she hadn't returned and she was missing. So Dave bolted into the sand dunes to see what was in there, because that's where she had come out from. And he saw, much to his shock, all these businessmen from the town hiding in the bushes, and they had regular clothes on. These were not policemen. He had seen a lot of cars at the site earlier when he was riding his jet ski, and he didn't quite know why. But he also saw someone who was picking stuff up out of the sand, and he realized that that was an individual, later he realized, who greatly resembled the person charged with this crime, and that may have been the true rapist. And so this was a spectator event for the club. The, spectacle of Mrs. Bernstein, I think her name was, being raped. And afterwards, somebody else was charged with this crime, forced to do time in prison, and then exonerated. And Avery brought a $38 million lawsuit against the county, the sheriffs, because of the false charge and the incarceration. And right as he was filing that lawsuit, that's when they suddenly charged him with another crime. And this was the murder of a woman called Teresa Hallback, a reporter. And he and his nephew are now doing a life sentence each for this. And it turns out when you investigate this all that you can about Stephen Avery, that this appears to be another false charge, but this is the power of the club. They just don't want to accuse one of their own, and they will victimize innocent people for their own crimes, and they control the police and the courts and politics and media and you name it. They've got members there.
Now, the Steve Avery, he is the subject of that popular show, Making of a Murder.
That's right. It's on Netflix, but there was a documentary made. I don't know how closely it follows this case, but he was the subject of The Making of a Murderer. I guess to convince us that, yeah, he went from rape to murder. But the fact is, there were so many people, I think some like 500,000 people who signed a petition to free Stephen Avery and acquit him of these charges. But, you know, what struck me, Tim, was that this club thing exists everywhere. And what was happening to Dave after he witnessed these events on the shore of the lake, when he opened his bar, he kept getting these visits from these older men. And, you know, they showed him photos of themselves, I imagine. They showed him photos of naked men doing stuff, sexual stuff to one another. And they said, you have to join the club. Don't you want to? Look at these pictures. And he said, no, I don't want to join this club. And over, they would pay him visits at his bar, and they would get very, very insistent. They would yell at him. They would tell him, you better join the club, Dave, or else something is going to happen. And that something that happened was the tragic murder of his manager, Marianne. He had also been receiving information from Marianne that while she was managing the bar, the same men would come in and they would say, you better get Dave to join the good old boys club, which was the Eagles Club. And she said, well, he doesn't want to. And she told him, you know, they're insisting you join, Dave. I don't know why, but you need to know. They're getting ugly about it. And the next thing that happened was Dave Bogatka went on a hunting trip for 10 days, and this was before cell phones. And when he returned, his mother told him, you know, Marianne died right after you left. She was found dead of a heart attack was the cause, covered with blood in her bed. And what had happened in his absence while he was on the hunting trip was that there was a giant party at his club, and all the booze was given away. At his bar, there was a giant party. All the booze was given away. Equipment was ripped out and, I guess, taken by people. And there was just a shell of a place left, and he had to declare bankruptcy, to say nothing of the murder of his manager or the death. And so this is the power of the club.
So I guess the message was sent to Dave that if you resist our blandishments, our offers, it's a deal you have to take. In order, a deal you can't turn down. An offer you can't refuse, as the Godfather might say. And so his manager is found dead. They say it's a heart attack, natural causes, yet there's blood on her. Yeah, she was covered with blood, lying in her own bed, and they deemed the cause of death to be a heart attack. But there's one thing in the newsletter, I think, where Marianne is telling Dave, more or less, she spells it out to him, because he offers to go to the authorities, and she says something to him, how futile that is. Yeah. She had been telling him, these guys keep coming in, and they keep saying, you need to join the club. And from Dave's blog, it says here,
On the last day Dave spoke to Marianne in person, she said she was sleeping with a gun because she was so fearful of these people, meaning the people who were constantly coming to the bar. Dave suggested going to the police, to which Marianne responded, "They are the police."
So he's driven. He's more or less, he's driven out of business, and he won't ever become a prominent business member of the community without joining the club. I guess that's the message we get from that. And to join the club, you have to be brought in and partake in their rituals or their whatever they do in secret or in the basement somewhere. And I guess that's one thing that's interesting. What you're describing is similar things we've heard about Skull and Bones and various other secret societies. This idea of clubs in various cities and locales. This is reminiscent of the lodge system of Freemasonry, and how societal or global control is maintained through the lodge system, whether it's intelligence or just being able to suborn or infiltrate, insinuate themselves at multiple levels of society. While the facade of normalcy is maintained. That's one thing that's most chilling about this. It seems to be a strategy that they seem to follow throughout the ages. Would you agree?
Right. They can include people who would then end up protecting them because of the benefits that come with club membership, which is for those who are, ordinary, just good business contacts and the opportunity to network and profit and be more successful. Mm-hmm. And then for those who are inclined to other kinds of activities, there's Satanism, there's pedophilia, there's I don't know what else. I mean, it's just now we're learning that this trafficking and whatnot goes on in all the cities of the world. There are always these rings that are discovered and busted, and apparently the enjoyment of children and children's energy in a sexual way and a sacrificial way is something that these people do. And that, you see, Tim, we were talking before the show, that is the stuff of ordinary people's nightmares. This is not what ordinary people fantasize about during the day as they go about their business. Ordinary people protect their children. They have tightly knit nuclear families with the best interests of all the members in mind. They don't exploit their children. And what I'm learning now, much to my horror, is that a lot of the children involved in human trafficking and pedophilia and sacrifice, which is murder, it's, very ugly, gruesome, grisly murder of these children. It's often on film. And then those films are sold in the black market to people who pay lots of money to watch them. And these children are bred for this industry. They're actually made by mothers who are either Satanists or participants, pedophiles, traffickers themselves. I read on Henry Macca's website, and I wrote to him to ask where this little bit was, because I remember copying it with my mouse and I was going to send it to myself, and I forgot to do that. But it was on one of his posts, and it said that the prostitutes of Washington, D.C. often conceive babies, and they, of course, the fathers are the high-level elite politicians and so forth, and they first hit up the fathers for support, and then they donate these babies and toddlers and children to the pedophilia industry. Awful.
Well, again, it seems crazy. It seems hard to believe, but we do live in a country that tolerates, 1.5 million abortions a year. I think globally it's about 50 million. And within that industry is also the selling of fetal remains or baby parts by Planned Parenthood. And so it's not too far of a stretch, at least in my estimation of things, to think that something like this can be going on, because it's just an extension of the same philosophy. It's something that's hard for most people to accept as going on, but if the authorities are compromised or controlled or in on it, who's going to investigate it? Who do you go to? As Marianne said, they are the police. You know?
That's right. And they have power to destroy you physically. They can take your life. They can arrange for an ugly accident, which is very peculiar. You know how many people die in car crashes, plane crashes, heart attacks, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
It's the same type of death. And so if you get in their way or you start drawing attention to what they're doing, I guess you're invited to join at some point, maybe. And if you're not, and you start to expose them, then you're eliminated. Or your children, your loved ones can be hurt. And these are messages to you that take note of the power we have, and we will do something to you if you get in our way. And yeah, they are the police, they are the authorities.
And a representation, or at least an illustration of this, I think that we can point to, because we're engaging in, I guess you could say informed speculation, because we don't have the benefit of, we don't have subpoena power, we can't issue warrants, we can't go in and demand that we investigate these, but you have to rely on these authorities, which, in our opinion, are compromised, is how the intelligence agencies operate. They have expertise in all types of dark arts, whether you had to arrange for someone's accidental death, how to suicide people if necessary. They have manuals, that train people how to do this to make things look like accidents. They can get planes to blow up, even with collateral to innocent other people involved in it to make it look like an accident. That's been done before. So we can look at some of these clubs or sacred societies or secret societies as being somewhat like the very intelligence services throughout the world. And in fact, I think they're linked in many respects because outfits like Skull and Bones at Yale University, they kind of formed the nucleus of our own intelligence services, the OSS and CIA. And so it's an operating manual or operating stratagem, so to speak, and how you kind of control society, or at least be able to manipulate society and maintain control of it. You mentioned that this one club, this Fraternal Order of Eagles, was founded, and it's sort of this local businessmen getting together, and they formed what they call an Order of Good Things, more or less to forming a cartel. And if they organize themselves properly, they can more or less cartelize a given industry or monopolize the local economy, and through that control, they can pretty much decide who's successful and who's not. And you take over things like whether the local radio station, the media, the local newspaper, and just apply this strategy nationally or globally, and it works.
And that's sort of what Freemasonry does. You can look at Freemasonry as a sort of technology that enables one to engage in high-level malfeasance and criminality and subversion. That's why the British Empire relied on it for so long. The British Freemasonry was central to the maintenance of the British Empire. That's through the lodge system, particularly on the European continent, but throughout the world. That's how it engaged in sort of secret communications and espionage, and also subversion of foreign societies through the Masonic lodge system. Introduction of subversive ideas to, undermine the local order of things. But you can also look at our own Central Intelligence Agency, which is, you could argue, is designed along Freemasonic lines. I was listening to Doug Valentine recently, and he's written a lot about the CIA as an organized crime operation. But he was talking about how the CIA will go in and undermine a foreign country and take it over. And what it does, it goes into said country, and it will infiltrate the governmental institutions like that government's intelligence agencies will be infiltrated by CIA assets. And then there's the other institutions like local police departments, local media, newspapers, TV stations, radio stations will be infiltrated by CIA assets. And even the civil societies, the civil society of a foreign government like the local Lions Club will be infiltrated by CIA assets. So pretty soon they'll be in a position to bend that foreign country or that society to its will. And, so, you can say is here when you're talking about the club, I think is the club a sort of a local application of this global strategy? Is that fair?
It's a catch-all term, I would say, for people who are knitted into this global order. Mm-hmm. And they might be on very local levels and not, high highly ranked or highly influential participants, but because they are in the order and they've taken vows and oaths and they're one of the brothers, it's a fraternal order. So they have an obligation. I suppose this is the morality of the club, a moral obligation not to rat on or snitch on what's going on at very high levels. And as long as they keep their mouths shut, they will prosper. They will be able to put, nice toys under the Christmas tree for their children and ascend into greater wealth, bigger houses, better cars, sending kids to college who then will follow in their footsteps and become a club member. And so not every member of every club has to be a dark, cloak and dagger, blood drinking pedophile, but it's those lower members that form the ranks of protection around what goes on at the top of the pyramid. I'm just speculating, and I use this term, the club, because it's the easiest term there is.
Yeah, it's rings within rings, degrees, as in Freemasonry calls it, and they call them, I think, porch brethren, the people who are members of these organizations who may be deriving some sort of, professional or business benefit from this relationship, but they're there to provide sort of this, the outer, the facade, and they're there to maybe to dispense charity, and they're not really aware of certain things. And from what I understand is you can be invited into a higher circle, and if you demur, they don't penalize you. You just don't go any higher anymore. And this is how they separate those who are willing to do things, to do some of these things that are necessary to rise through the ranks, and those who aren't. But nevertheless, people maintain their membership. From what I understand, the Council on Foreign Relations is very much the same way, and so is the CIA. And I would imagine any other intelligence service throughout the world, where it's highly compartmentalized. It's need to know, and very few people are aware of the whole picture. Yet they're part of the machine. They're helping it operate. And as you say, there's some benefits to belonging to it, and also some benefits to not making waves or making sure you don't ask inconvenient questions or problematic questions, and you just serve the system. You become sort of an organization man, is what the system relies on, sort of participation in the system. And everyone's allowed to get their beak wet a little bit, so they perceive some benefit, but they're not aware of the overall damage that's created by the system itself.
Right. I was listening to YouTube, maybe it wasn't even YouTube, I don't know. It was Jim Fetzer interviewing Jim Rothstein, who is a former New York City detective. And I have put this on my blog. People can go to sofiasmallstorm.com and scroll down, and you'll find the Dave Begotka interviews there. That's under the title Joining the Club. And then you'll find this Rothstein interview. So Detective Rothstein was retired. He explains that back in the 1970s, actually the late 60s, he started to investigate pedophilia and prostitution in New York City. And he says that what ordinary people think is pedophilia and prostitution is such a diluted version of what's really going on. He said, we have no idea. And what goes on is beyond our imagination. So I'm just going to read a little quote that I excerpted from the video, from the interview. So this is Rothstein talking to Jim Fetzer. Not only did I get assigned to this, meaning the investigation of prostitution and pedophilia, I was given an unlimited expense account. We didn't just work on police aspects, we also went into the psychological. We found out many, many things that were never known before. Many of these people, meaning the perpetrators, were victims themselves and became pedophiles. And then we have others who, when they reached a certain level of power, this was the next step to it, where they felt they could do anything they wanted to. And a big thing, too, is many of these people are set up to be compromised. One time there were 3 houses of prostitution in New York being used to compromise people. The only problem was I had an informant in every one. The informant told me about a pedophile operation, and the particular night on East 64th Street, they killed 2 little boys, 2 14-year-olds and a 15-year-old, while they were having sex with them. And eventually I served a subpoena on the people, meaning the individuals participating in this horrible stuff. And it was covered up under the pretext of national security. And Rothstein says, I personally identified the man and personally served him with a subpoena in Locust Valley, New York, at the coffee shop by the railroad station. And before we could get back to the office, it was shut down.
Yeah. And that's what you call the domino effect in your newsletter.
Yes, that's another term of mine. And what I mean by that is that this power goes up the chain and down the chain. So as you head higher, toward higher levels of power, certain activities are offered as par for the course. And so indulging in these activities becomes the norm. I mean, if you are someone who wants to be the local district attorney, right, and you're climbing through the ranks of office, and then you're offered something like this, and you're told, well, wink, wink, everybody does it. Don't worry about it. If you want to get to be DA, you're going to have to do this too. Otherwise, you can just stay right where you are. So I guess there's this power in this concept of brotherhood. We're all part of a brotherhood and whatever. They get these people drunk and they get them to have sex with children or do something that they probably wouldn't do otherwise. Certainly not at home with their wives, and that's it. And then they're in it, and they probably continue to do it, and there's photos and film of them doing it. And then if any of this is investigated, from high up comes that shutdown. So that's the domino effect going down the chain.
Yes, and a couple of cases would seem to back up your analysis there. Would be, well, one thing is the Finders case that was exposed of a child trafficking ring that was, I think, exposed in Florida, but it led up here to Washington, D.C., and an office, a warehouse that was equipped with, not only with a lot of satanic ritual paraphernalia and other things, but also at the time state-of-the-art communication systems and things like that. I think it's the late 80s, early 90s. And that investigation was quashed in the name of national security, which means it's probably a blackmail operation or some sort of operation that's feeding children to foreign dignitaries, businessmen, and such. And I think you're more than familiar with the Franklin scandal and how that also involved Washington D.C., call boy, human child trafficking, and also a blackmail operation here in Washington, D.C. that was run by one Craig Spence, another D.C. lobbyist. Or this one, he was a GOP lobbyist. But that he had parties at his house that was wired for audiovisual. And that appeared to be a blackmail operation. I think Deborah Jean Palfrey, her Cargill operation, was being monitored by the FBI, and according to some research, is being used by the FBI for blackmail operations, and she didn't get in trouble until she shut her operation down. They were using it for intelligence. So there's case studies here that we can, I guess we can infer that something like this, these things occur all the time, and as Detective Rothstein said, what he investigated. Of course, I think he was also part of the Son of Sam investigation in the 70s. I think that's still an open case, although it's cold. But I think it wasn't just a slow nut. I think that people who've done research on that, like the book The Ultimate Evil, Maury Terry's book, is that it had something to do with satanic rituals, Untermeyer Park, and murders out in out in California and South Dakota, and it also led back to some sort of what they thought was a snuff film operation, and that's where it is now. I think that it was a larger operation. Victims were being shot under streetlights, and the idea was they needed streetlights because someone was filming the operations. And so, I mean, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of these cases suggest that that's what's going on here. It's all part of a real sordid industry and also intelligence. I think FBI whistleblower Sybil Edmonds has written about this as well, about how she was talking to an FBI agent who was doing background checks, I think, on judicial appointees, and she said that he told her that when they find dirt on somebody, the person who has dirt on them gets promoted. The person who's clean doesn't, because it's hard to, how do you do business with an honest man? You know. So there's a strategy here. You know, it's almost like a plan to this type of operation.
Now, Tim, I'm going to draw attention to something. You've given us a lot of indicators that something is going on. I was just watching a YouTube of a young girl who was a ritual abuse victim in her own home in England, and she has fled, and she's, being safeguarded somewhere here in America. But she points out that when she tried to go to CPS, Child Protective Services, they didn't believe her. And it took a tremendous amount of effort, weeks and weeks. She was shuttled around in all kinds of foster care situations, and she finally managed to get to the United States, I'm not sure how, and ask for asylum. And so the point is that CPS did not believe what she had to tell them. Yet, CPS is the agency which, under the doctrine of parens patriae, which is a legal doctrine that gives the state power over any and all children, we have a new bill pending in California. It's following on the heels of SB 277, which is the mandatory vaccines. This one is called SB 18. It's engineered by the same Richard Pan. He's apparently a senator. And it's called Pan's New Bill for California, the Children's Rights Bill. So the state will define and demand what's appropriate in terms of care, education, nourishment, nutrition for any and every child. So the California legislature is declaring that all children and youth have inherent rights. They have the right to parents, guardians, and caregivers who act in their best interest, the right to form healthy attachments with proper adults for proper care and well-being, the right to live in a safe and healthy environment, the right to social and emotional well-being, etc., etc. And this Bill of Rights, Children's Bill of Rights, is going to give the agencies, the state agencies, the opportunity to come in and assess the child's home and the environment in which a child is being raised and declare it unfit. And what surprises me, although it's no surprise, is that in the case of this poor little British girl, she was definitely having horror stories to tell about her parents with probably ample proof. And CPS didn't do anything for her and didn't want to. They kept returning her to her parents initially. And now we've got CPS that's going to come in America and remove children for the flimsiest reasons based on their own standards, government set standards. And that will enable those children to be sent into foster care. And what I have found out now in my dabblings and just learning as we do is that many instances of foster care are far below what you would want for somebody, for a child. These parents, these foster parents are reckless, they are criminal or near criminal in many instances, and yet the children are placed in their care. Now, they do get a certain amount of money from the government for this care that they give to these foster children, but what I found to be very interesting is that the state receives a giant federal bonus for placing children in foster care. And in a given state, it might be $4,000 for every child that they remove from their natural home and natural parents and place in foster care. But when they remove a special needs child and they put that child in foster care, they get double or certainly a significantly higher amount. So these are called adoption incentive bonuses. And so it becomes in the state's interest, because it's going to profit, to displace children, dislocate them from their natural parents, and locate them into foster care, because the children are now commoditized. And when you place children who are minors, and especially if they're special needs children, autistic or handicapped in some way, and they can't express what's happening to them, and you place them in the care of people who are, not appropriate, meaning I'll just use the word near criminal or criminal, then you get the perfect setup for those children to be trafficked out to elites who are pedophiles who will pay plenty of money for these activities with these poor children. And as long as the children survive this torture, they make tons of money. They're potentially worth tens of thousands of dollars.
That reminds me of the what you just said there, the case of Georgia State Senator Nancy Schaefer, who was very critical of her state's child protective services. She was killed in a murder-suicide, allegedly. And all her friends and family said they were a very happy couple. They had suffered some financial reverses because of the housing market, but nothing that would have made them think that her husband would kill her and kill himself. But she was pointing out that CPS case officers in her state were paid cash bonuses of $4,000, $6,000 for each child that was removed from a family and adopted, put into foster care, then subsequently adopted. And she, I think her report was the corrupt business of the CPS. And she was pointing out that kids were literally being kidnapped from families of, under the most, ridiculous pretext, and being sold off, more or less. And this all derives from a federal program. I think it was the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1974, which was then amended and expanded by Bill Clinton in the late 90s. So, yeah, like you said, these agencies and agents are given cash bonuses for removing children from families.
These are actually contracts. Mm-hmm. Everything operates in contract and commerce form. So these agencies are commercial entities, and they look to create contracts and receive payments accordingly for the activities that they exist to do. And so if they exist to protect children on the face of whatever that means, then they'll make money if they go around and remove children from their natural parents and place them with other people, because all they do is operate on contracts, commerce and contracts. So they have a contract. This cash bonus is actually a contract from the federal government to do this. And the federal government just borrows money ad infinitum, and the debt grows and grows, and that money is funneled down the pike to people who are willing to build the country and create it in the vision of this police state, New World Order, exploitive, harmful, ruinous society.
And again, what's going on here is we have you mentioned earlier that how the club operates. They infiltrate, take over. They make sure that people within the club are promoted, and they become school principals. They become directors of agencies, perhaps director of child protective services, right? And once you get into these, once you infiltrate the bureaucracies of the various state agencies, you can again make sure that although Child Protective Services is there to ostensibly protect children, you can almost twist it around and make an agency for harming children under the color of law and under the majesty of the state. And that's the ultimate position that someone, if you had malevolent intentions and ambitions, that's where you want to be. And it appears that Child Protective Services, as the public schools, as the police, as the courts, have been suborned in many ways, many instances. And those who investigate these things usually don't turn out too well. They end up dying, or committing suicide, or being murdered, or dying in car accidents. If you recall the Franken scandals, the investigator for John DeCamp, who was spearheading the Nebraska State Legislature investigation, he claimed to have the goods on them, photographs and such. He'd gotten this stuff in Chicago and had flown up there under the pretext of going to the Major League All-Star game. I think it was 1989. And he had his own plane, so he flew up there with his son. And he talked to John DeCamp and said, "We got him. We have these photographs." More or less the smoking gun, but seems always missing in these cases. And his plane disintegrated in midair, killing him and his son. And his briefcase was never found. that was supposedly carrying the damaging information. And that's what happens to these people, if you get too close.
That's right, but passports can fall out of planes hitting buildings in New York and survive those explosions and crashes, right?
Well, if it supports the official narrative, yes. So, it's one of these things where it goes back to your idea. That's why I think that October newsletter was so insightful, because it gives us although you're speculating, but you're basing it on your understanding of how these other secret societies operate, how organized crime, how the mafia operates, is through a system of networking and various levels. You can effectively take over a society and make sure that you can engage in these things at a high level and with great frequency, and with a high degree of confidence that you're operating with immunity. And if you can operate with immunity, you can kill with impunity. Who's to stop you?
So, Tim, what's interesting to me is that these activities can be comfortably pursued as long as people are assembled and incentivized, which means money usually, to form the blocking panels on the lower level against prying eyes, right? So they can pay contracts, and the people who go to work for Child Protective Services, by the way, in Schaefer's research, she found that an enormous number of the child CPS agents were dubious in terms of moral character themselves. So it's like one big old club again. But on these lower levels and mid-levels, money is used as incentive and reward. But I am wondering, okay, so on the very high levels where they actually drink the adrenalized blood of tortured victims, many of whom are children, and they engage in human sacrifice and, indescribable sex acts with children, including babies, what they're really getting out of this. And that it's not something I want to spend all my time wondering about, but this is where they split from the average person.
Yeah, because most people understand the principle follow the money, and that's sort of economic determinism. But that works. I think that works for the general society in keeping people in line. But you're right, at this elite level or inner circle, if you will, we'll call them elite. There's some sort of there's a spiritual, sort of a metaphysical level to this that's hard to understand. I've heard the idea of them drinking blood with adrenaline in it, and if you torture an animal, in this case it's called a child, unfortunately, is an animal in their eyes, and with fear you get adrenaline, and there's some sort of high you get, from what I understand. I don't know if that's I've read about it. Fortunately, I never witnessed it myself, but gives us a sort of a look into the vampiric nature of these, the parasitical or vampiric nature of these people, if they are indeed engaged in such things. I remember the Atlanta child murders. Not John, what was his name? I forget, the researcher. The kids went missing in Atlanta. This was in 1980, and I guess Wayne Williams was the fall guy for that. People who've researched that said they really couldn't have been a one-man operation there. He seems to have been a fall guy. But there's some speculation that perhaps children were being harvested for interferon, for some sort of experiment. Not that, coupled with maybe some sort of psyop in the Atlanta community area, with with idea of serial killers and this stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with the late Dave McGowan's research regarding serial killers, how one element of it might have been a psyop designed to sort of terrorize the nation, to further the sort of strategy of tension, if you will, to bring it further promote a police state mentality, to atomize society, to stifle the formation of communities. Kids don't go out and play anymore. They're very protected in these things. And that's one way you can make a society more atomized and more, more easily managed through fear. But it's hard. Yeah, it's really. I mean, again, it's at that level. It's hard to understand because you're. I think at that point you're dealing with some sort of dark satanic ritual, and you know, I don't know necessarily if I believe it, but if they believe it and they think they're getting something out of it, at the end of the day, you still have victims. You know, children being tortured and murdered and sacrificed.
Right, and you know. This whole idea of Satanism, if you tell your next door neighbor that there's Satanists all over the place, and it might be the police chief in town, it might be, you know, somebody in a high level of government in your state, or many people, they're not going to believe you. But what I find again interesting is that the symbols of Satanism are so pervasive in our culture now. The children are buying, there are even satanic sneakers, and there's t-shirts with skulls all over them, and the satanic symbols in music videos, references, in advertising, the one eye on the dollar bill. I mean, it's all over the place. So if you point to these, you know, these proofs of Satanism, and you show your next door neighbor how this relates to Satanism, then what you've got is you've got a population that on a mass level is participating in Satanism, whether they realize it or not. So you've got the very dark, very horrific activities behind closed doors, whereby people must draw some kind of power or something from doing these things. That you and I don't really understand, but you've got our nephews and nieces and neighbors and our own children buying this stuff with this symbology all over it that they don't know is part of that market.
Yeah, well, one level of Satanism has been described to me is it's not necessarily worship of a deity or entity itself, but it's self-worship. And maybe if to get people to become self-worshiping, maybe you are serving the devil or Satan. That's the old joke, was that the best trick the devil ever played was convincing people he doesn't exist. But if you look at society itself being driven towards sort of this narcissism that we see being promoted everywhere. Of course, we have TV shows like Lucifer, I think, where Satan is the protagonist. You have these, you know, a few years ago, you had, of course, this trend of teenage vampire movies, these, you know, my estimations, sort of silly romantic teenage, where the vampires are good, you know. And, of course, that's all, you know, the whole zombie craze is part of that as well, sort of degradation of society, the devaluation of human life, getting people conditioned to, you know, killing their fellow man without any concern because they've been dehumanized. But if you like, you make a good point. If you gear society towards sort of this debt financed consumerism which is producing sort of these narcissistic individuals, that's part of what a lot of these TV shows do. Whether it's the you know, Real Housewives of New Jersey or Cutthroat Kitchen, these competitive shows that they're promoting, you know, sort of this ruthless approach towards life without any empathy. And in a sense, you are everyone, to the extent that people embrace that outlook on life, they have become de facto Satanists, although they may not realize it themselves.
Yeah, they're promoting competition as opposed to cooperation. And I think that the basic, you know, qualities of human interaction are cooperative rather than competitive. And you see this in a very banal example. If you walk up to anyone just about and you say, do you have the time? They will dig in their backpack or their purse or their pocket for their cell phone. They'll even turn it on if they have to tell you the time, right? In the old days, they used to flip their wrists and look at a watch. But now they actually go to a greater length to do that. I'm not sure why, but people want to help you out for a simple favor like that. Yet in our society, even in school, the whole way our society is structured, we are taught to compete with one another. You've got to do better than this one. You have to make more money. You have to get the highest grade. You have to, you know, go to a better college than Johnny, your best friend, or something. And it's very sad. And we see this competitive drive, which they've taught us, drives us to excel. I don't think so. I think it leaves you very alone at the end of the day, at the end of your life, you know, when you have amassed a big McMansion with granite everything and 3-car garage, and all your teenage kids are off in their own cars with their friends watching music videos on their phones. What do you have left? So okay, I just want to mention something because you mentioned Lucifer. Somebody drew my attention to a class of enzymes called luciferase. They're actually making these enzymes commercially available now. And these enzymes are oxidative, meaning they take up energy and express themselves as bioluminescence. Like the firefly uses an enzyme to create light. And they've actually named this enzyme luciferase. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? And so in the last, one of the last interviews I did with Sage of Quay, it was about biological darkness. And I don't know if we want to get into that, but I do believe that the cycle of night is of great interest to these perpetrators of doom and destruction, because it's during the night that things are degraded and biodegraded and degenerated by organisms, you know, like molds and fungi. They work best at night. But these people are Lucifer worshippers. And Lucifer is the angel of light. It's the angel of the nighttime light, the light of the moon, which is qualitatively different from the light of the sun. It's a silver frequency versus a golden frequency. And it, as a friend of mine said, it's the frequency that calls out the coyotes, the vampires, the moles, and it's the frequency that makes everything fall apart, which is part really of the natural cycle, because that degeneration gets turned into nutrients for the organisms that thrive in the light of the sun. But these perpetrators, as agents of Lucifer and worshippers of Lucifer, this is the light they worship. They worship the light of darkness, the light that comes out at night. Do you see what I'm saying? Because everything they do is at night. They have their nighttime rituals. They dress in black. So all their destruction is this. It's oxidation. In biology, oxidation means loss of energy.
Yeah, and of course, that's sort of is the oxidative stress, which causes so many human ailments. That seems that's a whole other topic, but how all the stressors that we're subjected to, our biology is subjected to with modern life, tends towards poor health, and of course supporting the medical industrial complex, which seems to be a whole other part of their business plan. I listened to your talks regarding biology, the darkness versus light and sunlight versus moonlight, and how they serve two different purposes. One promotes life, one breaks it down. And obviously, if you're promoting darkness, you're all the time, you're going to cause, without the rejuvenation, you're just going to get a breakdown.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.